he writes in the same way in all his letters, speaking in them of these matters. His letters contain some things that are hard to understand, which ignorant and unstable people distort, as they do the other scriptures, to their own destruction. 2 Peter 3:16. Greetings, mortals, and a capital day to you all. As usual, I am your loyal host Simeon, and this is the Library of Gnosis. In the annals of ancient texts and the corridors of theological discourse, the letter to the Colossians stands as a beacon of Orthodox Church doctrine, illuminating the oppressive side of Christianity. Yet, like many luminaries, its authenticity flickers in the scrutiny of scholarly inquiry. In today's broadcast, I will show you why Paul's letter to the Colossians should not be considered authoritative, and should actually be considered an apocryphal forgery. So, let us delve into examining just why this might be. As you should know by now, my favorite mainstream source, which uses a robust referencing system, is of course the one and only Wikipedia. Great resource, unless it is a political topic. It is usually my first go-to when trying to get a basic overview of a topic before the deeper research starts. Now, stay tuned until the end for the most spicy evidence I have been able to collect. Anyways, to start us off, I will simply be reading some of the arguments and counter-arguments on the article page for the Epistle to the Colossians. Scholars have increasingly questioned Paul's authorship and attributed the letter to an early follower instead, but others still defend its authenticity. If Paul was the author, he probably used an amanuensis or secretary in writing the letter, Colossians 4:18, possibly Timothy. The letter's authors claimed to be Paul and Timothy, but authorship began to be authoritatively questioned during the 19th century. Pauline authorship was held to by many of the early church's prominent theologians, such as Irenaeus, Clement of Alexandria, Tertullian, Origen of Alexandria, and Eusebius. However, as with several epistles attributed to Paul, critical scholarship disputes this claim. One ground is that the epistle's language does not seem to match Paul's. With 48 words appearing in Colossians, there are found nowhere else in his writings, and 33 of which occur nowhere else in the New Testament. A second ground is that the epistle features a strong use of liturgical hymnic style, which appears nowhere else in Paul's work to the same extent. A third is that the epistle's themes related to Christ, eschatology, and the church seem to have no parallel in Paul's undisputed works. Advocates of Pauline authorship defend the difference that there are between elements in this letter and those commonly considered the genuine work of Paul, i.e. 1 Colossians. It is argued that these differences can come by human variability, such as a growth in theological knowledge over time, different occasion for writing, as well as use of different secretaries, or amanuenses, in composition. As it is usually pointed out by the same authors who note the differences in language and style. The number of words foreign to the New Testament, and Paul, is no greater in Colossians than in the undisputed Pauline letters. Galatians, of similar length, has 35 hapaxa legomena. In regard to the style, as Norman Perrin, who argues for its pseudonymity, notes, the letter does employ a great deal of traditional material, and it can be argued that this accounts for the non-Pauline language and style. If this is the case, the non-Pauline language and style are not indication of pseudonymity. End quote. Not only that, but it has been noted that Colossians has undisputedly Pauline stylistic characteristics, found nowhere else in the New Testament. Advocates of Pauline authorship also argues that the differences between Colossians and the rest of the New Testament are not as great as they are purported to be. As theologian Stephen D. Morrison points out in context, quote, biblical scholars are divided over the authorship of Ephesians and Colossians. He provides as an example the reflection of theologian Karl Barth on the question. While acknowledging the validity of many questions regarding Pauline authorship, Barth was inclined to defend it. Nevertheless, he concluded that it didn't matter much one way or the other to him. It was more important to focus on quid scriptum est, what is written, than quis scripesseris, who wrote it. Quote, it is enough to know that someone, at any rate, wrote Ephesians. Why not Paul? 30 to 60 years after Christ's death. Hardly any later than that. Since it is attested by Ignatius, Polycarp, and Justin. Someone who understood Paul well and developed the apostles' idea with conspicuous loyalty as well as originality. Alright, now it is time to refute their counter-arguments as to why it should be considered authoritative. To begin with, they even seem to admit that it was most likely not written by Paul himself, but instead either written on the behalf and dictation of Paul, or someone familiar with his teachings. Now let us begin by examining the first prospect, that it was not written by Paul, but dictated by him. This would still not explain the many discrepancies in wording and phrasing that is brought up as reasons to why it was not written by Paul. If Paul really did dictate it, you would think the scribe would be very careful with the wording used. Would he not? Then let us examine the other proposal, that it was neither written by Paul nor dictated by him, but instead written by one of his followers. The argument they used is, quote, someone who understood Paul well and developed the apostles' idea with conspicuous loyalty as well as originality. Originality? What? So basically they are saying that he made up a bunch of stuff, whole cloth, on his own, and this is supposed to be the authoritative word of God. If we go by the supposed date of the letter having been written in 62 AD, and its focus on refusing Gnosticism, then this must mean that Gnosticism must go back even before this date. This is well within the lifetime of the apostles themselves. If this was not dictated by Paul, and was only written by a follower of his who was familiar with his teachings, then you would also think that since the earliest church congregation of the church were Gnostics, and presumably not only knew Paul, but also the very apostles themselves, then they would be very familiar with the teachings of Paul and the apostles. Yet, since Colossians contradicts their theology, and it was only written by another follower of Paul, what would make the words of this single follower any more authoritative than the rest of the congregation? If this happens in any of the modern Christian churches, they would consider it heresy, yet for some undefined reason, we are supposed to consider it authoritative. Walter Bujard compares the writing style of Colossians to the other Pauline letters, focusing especially on those of comparable length: Galatians, Philippians, and 1 Colossians, and looking at an inordinate wide range of stylistic features. The use of conjunctions of all kind, infinitives, participles, relative clause, repetition of words and word groups, use of antithetical statements, parallel constructions, the use of preposition, and the piling up of genitives, and on and on. In case after case, Colossians stands apart from Paul's letters. How often does a book of Paul's use adversative conjunctions? Galatians 84 times, Philippians 52, 1 Thessalonians 29, but Colossians only 9. Casual conjunctions: Galatians 45 times, Philippians 20, 1 Thessalonians 31, but Colossians only 9. Consecutive conjunctions: Galatians 16 times, Philippians 10, 1 Thessalonians 12, but Colossians only 6. Believers have not only died with Christ, but they have also been raised with him. They are already leading a kind of glorious existence in the present. This is the view Paul argues against in Corinthians. Maybe he changed his mind. But given the stylistic differences, and the other matters of content to be discussed, it seems unlikely. Colossians is written by someone who has taken a twist on a Pauline theme, moving it precisely in the direction Paul refused to go. The letters from Paul condemning Gnosticism were discovered by Bishop Irenaeus at the same time, coincidentally, he was publishing a book called Against Heresies, which is also a book condemning Gnosticism. It is for this reason that many people suspect that those letters from Paul were likely later forgeries by the Roman Church. Why would they do this? The reason is because in the other writings of Paul, he is using Gnostic language. For example, the idea of witnessing Christ as a vision of light on the way to Damascus, and being taken up to the third heaven. For one, Gnostics refer to themselves as the religion of light. For two, Damascus was used as a secret code word by the Essenes to refer to their base in Qumran. For three, the third heaven represented the third level of initiation, where one experienced gnosis and embodied the Christos. All of this suggests that Paul was a Gnostic, and some even believe he was Apollonius of Tyana, and that Paul was like a nickname for Apollonius, or the little Apollo. This would mean that the church took one of the most Gnostic people in the Bible and made him anti-Gnostic, likely because they saw Gnosticism as a rival tradition to Roman Catholicism. Timothy Hogan. Now, I want to thank you all for watching. Please leave a like, subscribe, go check out my Patreon. Hey, you know what to do at this point. I'll see you in the next one, mortals.